So today we're going to be talking about the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. Malcolm X, originally born as Malcolm Little, started his life as a pretty normal young boy. He was born into a happy family in Nebraska, America. However, as you begin to read the book, you realise that his early happiness does not last very long. Malcolm, as a young boy, couldn't understand why the colour of his family's skin was such a problem to so many people that they'd met. And his life quickly turned into heartbreak, despair, and persecution. However, one of the most incredible things about this story is through all of his trauma that this little boy experienced, he grew up to be one of the most influential men in the entire history of America. The autobiography of Malcolm X tells a story that goes from a prison cell to Mecca. It was published in 1965. It is an captivating story of an American black militant religious leader and activist. Originally born as Malcolm Little, as we discussed before, and he changed his name to Malcolm X, I find the irony of his original surname quite comical, as before Malcolm X was killed in terms of his status, he was anything but little. As you will learn to discover if you do eventually read this book. Alex Haley conducted extensive audio-taped interviews just before Malcolm X's assassination in 1965, and this book is a recount of Malcolm X's life. The autobiography starts right back at the start of his life when Malcolm was born in 1925, and both of his parents died when he was at a young age. The major conflict within the novel is Malcolm's struggle against racism of white America, but also the internal problems of various rights organisations. After the government essentially tears apart his family, Malcolm can no longer bear the racism of his all-white high school in Michigan. So Malcolm flees to Boston and Harlem. However, he takes the wrong path and he sinks deep into a life of crime. Unfortunately, with no sign of Malcolm changing his ways, in 1946 he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for a burglary charge. The climax of the story is Malcolm's conversion to Islam within prison. He spends long hours and long days studying the religion in prison, and it puts Malcolm on a course to rise in the ranks of the nations of Islam. When Malcolm is eventually paroled in 1952, he became an outspoken defender of Muslim doctrines. During 1963, as the book explains, and we go on to read many of Malcolm's speeches, he forms the Organisation of Afro-American Unity and had received considerable publicity by the time of his assassination in 1965. So, my personal thoughts towards the book are, overall, it was one of the best books I've read in a long time. I loved learning about Malcolm's life, how it was to grow up being part of a black family in the 1920s and 30s, and hearing about his shoe-shining days and the lengths he would go to achieve the best-looking conch. I found that quite interesting. I love the change of character throughout the book. Malcolm at the beginning was being portrayed as the protagonist as a little boy, but then to a rebelling antagonist by seeping into the dark underworld of Harlem by committing crimes, taking drugs, and being sent to prison. And then I found eventually at the end returning to be the protagonist by converting to Islam and trying to do good and help others. with his inspirational speeches and, his creation of different movements. I also love the way Alex Haley writes. I feel like he tells the story to make us as readers feel like we're a close friend and not just a stranger. However, towards the end, I was finding the book a little hard to follow. I was losing motivation to pick up the book, and I found Malcolm's long-winded speeches hard to interpret. The story was becoming less about his movements in life, and it was just more full of speeches. Malcolm also frequently discussed beliefs and the ongoing issue of the divide between black and whites. And after 2 or 3 of these speeches, I found it hard to continue. I also felt he was a bit stereotypical in some of his speeches. Malcolm assumed that all whites were racist towards blacks, when I remember a part of the book that's not true. He would discuss black and whites mixing when he used to go Lindy hopping, and black and white couples, so I didn't feel that was entirely true. I think he was right that the majority of the population was like that back in those days, but I don't think it's fair to say that everyone felt like that, because it was clearly not the case. However, I continued to pursue through the speeches because really the anticipation was killing me. I needed to know what happened in the end. Overall, I think I preferred the first half of the book, hearing about his childhood experiences and personal encounters. The other thing that I'm slightly hesitant about with this specific text is that it is an autobiography. Autobiographies rely often on memory, which are notoriously fallible and shaped by self-image. However, all in all, it didn't make me enjoy it any less. I just had to remember to take this into account when I was reading and take the facts with a pinch of salt in some aspects. Malcolm's journey to Mecca had a great influence on him, and he learned more about Islamic teachings during his journey. Consequently, this changed many of his previous racist thoughts about white people. That's why when he returned, he chose an alternate path. Sadly, it was a path which guided him eventually to his assassination. However, his journey lives on through Alex Haley's book, and today many schools are using the text to inform children about ethics and the troubles in the 1920s and 30s with racism. I feel it is a riveting autobiography for teenage readers to learn about Malcolm's defiant image, his goal of African American self-determination. His teachings about drugs and self-destruction are as relevant today as when he delivered wake-up speeches on the corner of 125th Street in Harlem years ago. The autobiography of Malcolm X is probably one of the most impactful books I've read. It's probably the book that started me off on my intellectual journey, and it opened my mind in so many different ways. Primarily, that there is so much more to society than meets the eye. I think everyone, regardless of race or colour, would benefit immensely from reading this book. I think that would be a good first step in resolving the racial tensions that still exist today, but have been swept under the rug after the civil rights movement, on the premise that all racial problems were solved with the abolishment of segregation. Malcolm X still remains a great hero, and I personally think it would be fantastic if young people were exposed to such a consciousness-expanding book. We need to educate children properly, as they are the future. The autobiography of Malcolm X was a great read. I was truly inspired by Malcolm, in the sense of how he had the drive to change his life, a complete turnaround, to go from a street hustler to a civil rights activist and dedicated Muslim is beyond inspiring and almost unbelievable. From this book, the takeaway from this, for me, is that if you're not happy with something in your life, change it. Anything is possible if you work hard. I believe in human rights for everyone, and none of us is qualified to judge each other, and that none of us should therefore have that authority. You can't separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. So early in my life, I had learned that if you want something, you had better make some noise. We need more light about each other. Light creates understanding. Understanding creates love. Love creates patience. And patience creates unity. A wise man can play the part of a clown, but a clown can't play the part of a wise man. A man who stands for nothing will fall for anything. If you have no critics, you'll likely have no success. Malcolm X.